Morning, everybody. Thank you very much for worship this morning, and thank you for communion as well. I think that's really been helpful for me, even in clarifying some of what I've been thinking through and praying through, and as I've been listening to God about what I felt called to talk about this morning. And that is, I wanted to look at one of the most classic passages in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Does anyone know off the top of their head? 1 Corinthians, sorry. Good, thank you. I'll read it then. We had this one, was it at our wedding? Liz isn't here this morning, so let's say it was. If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but I do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all of my possessions to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but I do not have love, I am nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It doesn't envy. It doesn't boast. It isn't proud. It doesn't dishonor others. It is not self-seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I put away the ways of childhood behind me. For now we see only as a reflection, as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And these three now remain: hope, faith, and love. And the greatest of these is... Got it. Nice one. Well done, everybody. In particular, as I was reflecting on this, I think it came in the midst of thinking about our year, this year that we're spending, this year of reflection, this time on our knees, seeking to hear from God about what he has to say for us and what he has to suggest to us about what's ahead, what lies ahead, what's the plan that God has for us as we step into the future. And I've certainly been part of many discussions, conversations, times of prayer, planning meetings and things like that, with the specific intent of figuring out what are the plans as we go ahead, what are the reasoned decisions that we can make. But this section, I think, I get the bit at the start reasonably well, still working at it. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror, then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. I've always found that verse quite moving. I think there's a very essential part of what it is to be human, that is, to desire to be known by other people, known and loved. Think about the challenge of even knowing ourselves, let alone being known by others. We think about that picture of that Ross had up of the cross that he's wearing. The the prisons that we find ourselves in. Some of them that we're acutely aware of, and some of them that we suddenly discover after time that we've been standing in. I don't know about you, but my journey, the journey that God has led me through in terms of my own walk with him, has been a journey of discovering again and again these patterns or parts of my lifestyle or attitudes that are prisons that I didn't even realize I was in. And I can see the negative ways they've affected me over time. But to understand them, to understand myself and what's going on, is a complex, ongoing process, a vulnerable process, a process of trust. And it's something that I know I need help with. Knowing is hard. And that's for ourselves, knowing ourselves. But then when it comes to relationships, to love, to be in a loving relationship with someone is to reveal yourself to them and for them to reveal themselves to you. And with that depth of knowledge, there is space for love. There are quite a number of words I've been told in the Inuit language for snow. They live around it, they're with it all the time, they've got to know it pretty well. They can grapple with it, and they've got names for different types of snow in the way that they engage with them. If you want to know about snow, they're probably the people to whom you go. I think that's on their business card, that little rhyme I made up. If you wanted to know about yaks, right, you'd possibly go to the highlands of Nepal, and I reckon there'd be a bunch of people there who've been working with them day in, day out, who could tell you exactly how they work, how they move, what their attitude is day by day. I had a mechanic, and I'd drive in, and he'd be able to tell me what was wrong with my car from the sound that my car was making as it was coming in. And the problem was me. No. But you could hear from the engine, you could hear, oh, that's, your back left brake is out or something like that, You've got these professional wine tasters, who can take a sip and they'll tell you, I know that's from the northeastern mountain ranges in Italy, it's the 15th grape along or whatever it is. They could tell, from the smell exactly what it is. They know their stuff. They're intimately knowledgeable. We are really good at this, I think, at specialising as a species. You asked me about Star Wars. We've got our areas, right, and we can learn at profound depth. That being said, there hasn't been a day since the very first day of existence of man that women haven't been walking alongside and been in intimate relationship. And yet for just as long, there have been jokes and frustrations about the failures to communicate between men and women. The issue isn't, I believe, men and women, but who are these people? These are it's not just the snow, different types of snow, but you've got people who are whole and full, who are in relationship and have got the job of trying to understand the depth of one another to create and build intimacy. And in a fallen world, that is a very difficult thing to do. I had a joke. Are you ready? A wife calls her husband and says, "Be careful driving home. There's this idiot driving the wrong way down the freeway." And the husband goes, "It's worse than that. There's hundreds of them." That's not about gender. When we tell a joke, I heard a joke being described to me as, so what happens in a joke, the success of a joke is about the distance that you travel between where you expected it to go and where it ended up. And in that moment where we suddenly flipped around and realized what was going on, all of us suddenly rushed together to the same place of understanding. We understood where we were all at together, and there was a joy that came in the midst of that. That's an easy way to do it. But for those of you who have been in relationships with another human being, you know that there are challenges that come with that. With, first of all, knowing someone else, understanding them. And second of all, sharing yourself and risking being misunderstood or being understood. It is at the core. The number one bit of relationship advice that Liz and I got as we were preparing for marriage, and have got consistently since then, was always communication. Learn to communicate well. Learn to express who you are and what's happening and what you want, and then also to obviously receive that back. Work on that, understand each other, and then you've got the capacity for love. Can anyone think of a really bad gift that they've received? Don't make eye contact with anyone. Just think about it. The issue, I would hope, was not just perhaps the monetary value was insufficient, but was possibly that it mismatched who you are. And instead of demonstrating that it connected, that person understood you and knew you and what you wanted, it demonstrated that they didn't understand you and what you wanted. And that Liz wasn't just really into vacuum cleaners. That was actually, that wasn't so much a personal desire. It was a complaint about the household equipment and not an appropriate anniversary gift, hypothetically. It's an ongoing job, and it takes what we've got if understanding ourselves is hard. Self-understanding and understanding others has never been, I think, a real gift of mine. Especially as a teenage boy, I think I was not ideally equipped in terms of, emotional nuance and some of those other things that come along with that. And I think one thing that I certainly was not really equipped to understand was, what on earth is a book like Song of Solomon doing in the Bible? You've got this erotic poetry in the middle of the Bible. You know how many times it references God in Song of Solomon? Not once. Not once. Not appropriate, if you ask me. A little bit inappropriate. What's it doing in the Bible? And I kind of set that question aside for a pretty long time, maybe until after I was dating for a while. And it's a serious question. Why is it? And when I looked up the history, the short version is, it has been a contentious debate. Back when they were deciding whether to include it in the Jewish scriptures, there was debate. Do we keep it in or do we not? Well, it was written by Solomon. He's we all know him. And then even again, as they discussed again whether to keep it in the Christian canon going on, there was discussion. There were people who said, no, let's drop it. What the heck? What's it got to do with what we're on about? I'm doing a bit of jumping here, but I think it'll connect together here. But if I say the word romance, what words come to mind if I do word association? It's tricky, right? I mean, not for me. I'll throw some words out. What about measured? Does that fit or not? No, not really. What about proportionate? What about in due time? What about extravagant? Generous? What about over the top? What about calm? No, not so much. It's funny, the words that we use are not, they don't speak of something which is kind of set and ordered, but they speak of something that's beyond, that talks about something that connects with something non-explicit in a sense, that connects with words that are hard to be spoken, that talk about being known and expressing something deep. What about if you go to a museum, right? If you go to a museum, have you ever seen someone, or have you experienced looking at an artwork and welling up and getting emotional looking at it, looking at a piece of art. Have you ever experienced that before? Being moved at a very deep level by a work of art? Anyone here? This might be the wrong crowd. Yeah? Okay, yeah. I remember when I was a teenager seeing that happen and being baffled. And then I remember the first time I looked at an artwork and feeling that something move. And the frustration when someone says, well, what's happening? What the heck? If it's a thing with a bit of blue on it or something like that. What's going on in this picture? Picture of a guy and another person and they're shaking hands. What's going on in that explicitly that is creating a change in you? And it's very difficult. It is very difficult often to put that into words, to quantify what's happening in that time. Or what about, maybe this is something a bit more accessible, if you go somewhere where you that had significant memories for you as a child, and you feel that sense of nostalgia. Have you experienced that before? You walk in or you smell something and all this stuff comes rushing back. And then you say, well, what is it? What is it exactly that's happening? What's the mechanism here? There's lots of stuff at play that's just beyond what we can kind of write down and say in words really well. Emotions, I think artwork, romance, poetry, these are things which we have that are about expressing things that cannot easily be explicitly expressed. We engage with something that's bigger than we can fit and package into words that come out of our mouth. We engage with something that's bigger than the reality that we can kind of jot down on a piece of paper and put numbers on. And this, I think, this points to something about what it is to be human that's beyond the rational and the material. In the scientific age, with the Industrial Revolution, modernization, logic, I think a lot of profoundly good progress was made in human society, and we have a lot to be grateful for. A lot of superstition was done away with, a lot of misunderstandings were put to bed through good, solid, objective reason. I think science, at its basic form of working things through and finding truth empirically, is of God and is a wonderful, profound gift that we have. But when it exists at the cost of the questions that we have inherent in us that need to be dealt with at a level that's bigger than what we can grapple with words and numbers and empirical scientific tests, we can come unstuck. We fall back to poetry. We fall back to romance. And sometimes to have a picture of God that speaks beyond the explicit and the doctrinal, we need things like romantic poetry in the Bible. We need to do things like, instead of standing and reading out a list of belief that we all affirm together, we sing with musical accompaniment, and our hearts soar as we share in worship each week together. We know this at a basic level. So as we desire to be known, as we desire to know each other, and as we are called to be known and know God more and more, we recognize that we step into a place where it's more than we can fully understand. We can no longer stand on what we understand. Does that make sense? You lean not on your own understanding. We step into the world of faith, into the world of song and worship. And we step into that space with confidence. There is a challenge that comes with that, obviously. There is vulnerability that comes with that. And we know the vulnerability of expressing emotions. I did, as I said, I worked with Bethel Funerals for not a decade, but coming on that, I saw a lot of funerals, Christian and otherwise. And one of the great challenges in funerals was finding the right way to appropriately express emotion, even at a funeral, which is really, really difficult for a lot of people. I think we find that especially in our culture. I did some different culture funerals where, it's not a proper funeral unless you have got wailers. Someone should wail during the service. Someone should break down in tears. There are expressions of emotion that are required in order to help the community connect in with what's happening that's bigger than what's going on. And it was extremely uncomfortable for me the first time I sat and the wailers started wailing during the funeral service. And my gut was, well, someone needs to settle them down, all right? Or else we're all going to start feeling upset. And then it kind of hit me, well, I suppose that's kind of what we're here for, is to share this sense of grief together. Maybe we're missing something in the midst of that. But there's a vulnerability. We know the vulnerability of sharing from deep within ourselves. And even the parts of ourselves that we know are prickly and painful. And I think this can be the case for God as well. As we come to God, we can come to God with a sense of pain and shame. A lot of people find the idea of walking through the doors of church a terrifying idea. They have genuine fear about the idea of walking into a church. Because what happens when you walk into church, you come into the presence of God. And I know what I'm like, and I've heard about what God's like. What is there for me in church except for exposure, for God to be revealed to God, and for my shame to be there, and for me to receive the judgment that I'm owed? And I think we carry that sometimes too. And yet, as we open before God, as we come to know God, we see him in his ultimate expression in Jesus, who came down and died for us. As brothers and sisters, we encourage each other. We preach, we teach, we share, we encourage to the fullness of each of our intellects. And by his grace, he takes joy in that. And he reveals more of himself to us in that. But as we understand God, we see that he is not a measured out, metered God of strict rules and regulations. He's not the parole officer hiding behind your house, waiting, camping to catch you out as soon as you drop the ball. He's not the guard standing outside heaven waiting for exactly the right passcode or else you can't get in. What are the pictures we see? We see the widow searching for that coin. We see the shepherd going out into the wilderness to find the lost sheep, to bring it back, to celebrate. We see the father of the prodigal son watching the horizon and then coming out to meet with the son. And when we look at that story, what happens when the father goes out to meet the son? Well, I'm sure we can all expect the first thing he does is he lists the things that he's done wrong, and then he gets him to sign a contract and say sorry and say what he's going to do different next time. And then he figures out what the costs are that are due. And then once that is done, he allows him to come back into his household. None of that happens. He doesn't do any of the checks. He runs out to meet the son. He knows his son and he can see the heart of his son already. He meets him in an embrace. And as the son begins his apology, he begins to express what's in his heart. The father cuts him off with an embrace and wraps his cloak around him and brings him in and celebrates. God knows us already. God knows us profoundly. And in that, we also see that God loves us and he's waiting for us to return. This year, as we spend time reflecting and practically planning, meeting things out, saying those words together, I think we can't lose sight of God's desire to speak to us of things that are beyond the practical concerns of our future as a church, but also to speak to us of his love for us, to speak to us of our own pains and vulnerabilities that he wants to work on, to speak to us of of prickles and hurts that exist and float inside of us, between us, around us. To speak to us with songs and poetry, with artwork. And I would pray that as a church we would be open and receptive to that and hold it as it comes. I'd like to open up a time of prayer, and then we'll finish up. Father, all of